Well, good afternoon, ladies. I'm Michelle Easton, president of the Clare, Boothe, Luce Policy Institute, and I want to thank you for joining us for our May Conservative Women's Network luncheon. And a special thanks to Charlotte Florence, who hasn't co-hosted with us before, but she's representing Heritage. Charlotte is Research Associate for Africa and the Middle East here at the Heritage Foundation. Sometimes when we have time, it's kind of fun to go around and let everybody introduce themselves. Just give your name and who you're affiliated with, especially for our speakers, so she can know some of the people who are here. So why don't we start over here with Catherine, who is Clare Boothe Luce, of course.
And we'll just pass the microphone.
Good, or maybe you can even hold it and move it.
Okay, that's
okay?
I'm Catherine Rodriguez. I am the program director at the Clare Boothe Luce Institute.
I'm Mary Miller. I am development officer at Luce.
Lori Mashburn. I work in Coalition here at Heritage.
And I'm Cindy Rushing, and I'm also with Clare Boothe Luce.
Hi, I'm Crystal Hill, and I'm just an intern at the Washington Times.
Hi, I'm Amy Milliken, and I run my own business. I met Faith, yay, because I worked in South Sudan.
Laura Truman with the Heritage Foundation.
Marguerite Bowling with the Heritage Foundation.
Rachel Slobodian with the Heritage Foundation. Jessica Springer with the Heritage Foundation.
Hi, Kathy Brugger, President of the National Federation of Republican Women.
Sherry Adey with National Federation of Republican Women.
Anusha Ramaswamy, National Federation of Republican Women.
Maria Jeffrey, I'm also at NFRW.
I am also at NFRW, and I'm Gail Ledwig.
Hi, Vanessa Kermick, CIT Group, which is a bank.
Barbara Nelson, and I do some work with Uganda, Sudan, and Kenya.
I'm Bethany Diamond with the National Center for Public Policy Research.
I'm Chelsea Macari with the Institute on Religion and Democracy.
Terrific. Since we're a networking group, we'll network during lunch, but does anybody have any announcements about upcoming things? Anybody here looking for a job? Never say just an intern. I was an intern once too. It's half of us started as interns. It's a wonderful way to get going. I'll tell you about one at Clare Boothe Luce just for interns. It's on June 6th. It's just for interns. It's up on the Capitol Hill Club. It's an all-day event. 9:30 to 4:30, we give you wonderful food and lunch and snacks and all. And it's an opportunity to hear from some of the top women in the conservative movement about how you can succeed as an intern and stand out from your class in a good way. And as well, career and other concerns that young conservative women have, discussion of just about everything. And Catherine is running this here, right here, Catherine Rodriguez. You can either call us at the office or talk to Catherine. Again, it's Friday, June 6th, 9:30 to 4:30. You should really go to your supervisor and say, I really need this. It's going to make me a much better intern, if you can. I know it's tough with newspapers. So that's our announcement, Clare Boothe Luce. Anything else? Heritage have anything coming up? Or anybody looking for a job or anything like that?
I can make one announcement. And
Good.
That is on July 11th that we are doing a reception for interns. And part of that has to do with the RNC and with the 2 interns that we will be having at the National Federation. We invite you to come.
Terrific.
And Ms. Rodriguez, definitely we want to talk to you.
Terrific. Sounds good. Anything else? All right. Well, we are so glad to have Faith Mcdonald with us today to discuss a really important topic, the persecution of women around the world. We've all heard liberals claim there's a war on women here in the U.S., but I think our speaker today is going to show American women are very blessed compared to the atrocities women in other countries face every day. Faith is the director of Religious Liberty Program at the Institute on Religion and Democracy, and she runs their Church Alliance for a New Sudan, a project to mobilize churches for advocacy and action against the genocide in Sudan. She's a co-founder of the Sudan Coalition in Washington, D.C., a group that worked to mobilize U.S. churches as well as student groups and others to fight against slavery and genocide. Faith is a board member and advisor to many organizations, including the North Korea Freedom Coalition and Voices for Sudan. as well as a charter member of the Nigeria Task Force and Act for Sudan. She's helped organize rallies and protests in front of the White House, the Canadian Embassy, and the Sudanese Embassy, and has drafted legislation on religious persecution for both houses of the United States Congress and for the Episcopal Church. She was part of the initial task force that helped pass laws to protect victims of international sex trafficking. Faith co-wrote the book, Girl Soldier, A Story of Hope for Northern Uganda's Children, and has written for numerous publications, including National Review, The Weekly Standard, and Christianity Today, to name just a few. She's also a contributing author to Sorrow and Blood, Christian Mission in Context of Suffering, Persecution, and Martyrdom. Faith attended Easton Nazarene College in Massachusetts and received her master's degree in English at the University of Maryland. She was married to the late Francis Mcdonald and has a daughter, Fiona. Please join me in welcoming Faith Mcdonald.
Oh, thank you very much. It's great to be here with you all. Thanks so much for having me to the Heritage Foundation and the Clare Boothe Luce Institute and also the Conservative Women's Network. I think that this is a powerhouse that needs to be tapped, especially for the subject which I speak about, the persecution of people for their faith around the world. I do speak a lot about this topic, but I have to confess that I haven't focused on the issue of women separately very much in this, but the timing is crucial, and this is an issue that affects women in particular ways that women are very vulnerable to. And as Michelle said, we're aware of the fraudulent claims that the Republican Party and particularly conservatism is waging a war on women. And in that claim, too, I believe that kind of the germ of that comes from the idea that Christianity, or more generally our Judeo-Christian heritage, is waging a war on women and has been for centuries. You know, the whole thing about the patriarchy and oppression of women in the churches and the taking away the right to choose and all those kind of things. Well, on the contrary, we know that as women, we are beneficiaries and not victims of conservatism. And through it, we enjoy the benefits of individual liberty and the privilege of individual responsibility, things that many of our fellow women around the world do not share. As well as understanding the importance of traditional marriage and family and our potential to prosper in our lives. And as my organization, IRD, has said in what we put out years ago, a document called the Christian Women's Declaration, as women, we are beneficiaries, not victims of our Christian faith. Despite its imperfect outworking in history, women of the early church gave witness to Christ in boldness of speech, purity of character, and even the final sacrifice of martyrdom. But it's not just women from the early days who are strong and faithful witnesses and who are martyrs for their faith and for their belief. Throughout the centuries, and even more today, in the 20th and 21st centuries than in all other centuries combined, the persecution of Christians has affected women. Forces of religious intolerance and religious supremacism, particularly found in Sharia, Islamic law, are what are actually waging war on women of all faiths and no faith today. So exposing the lie that conservatism is waging a war on women by revealing the real war on women is not just important because it helps the cause of conservatism. It's important because these women are our sisters. They need our voices. They need our advocacy and our intercession. So we're going to look at some women in particular and also the principles of what this war on women is doing to them. But I don't want us just to look at this war on women that's taking place. I want us also to see and honor the strength and the courage of these women and understand that the same faith for which they are victimized is what's helped them to endure. So we're going to look at some pictures right now, particularly starting with a very critical case. I actually have two pieces published today about this case. One, which shockingly to me, was the front page of Breitbart.com today, and also on Front Page Magazine. But this is Miriam Yayaya Ibrahim from Sudan, and her husband there, Daniel Wani. Miriam was just yesterday sentenced to death for apostasy in Sudan. It was said that she had left the Muslim faith and become an apostate, which was not true. She grew up as a Christian. Her mother was an Ethiopian Orthodox Christian, and she followed the faith of her mother. She's 27 now. She's a medical doctor who graduated from the University of Khartoum. And she met Daniel, and they were married in December of 2011. Daniel had come to the United States. He's from South Sudan, and during the war, he was able to come to the United States. I'm not sure, but I think he was probably one of the Lost Boys of Sudan, if you've heard about them. But anyway, they got married in December of 2011. He had gone back to Sudan and met her there and fell in love. And so he applied right away because he's an American citizen. He had become a U.S. citizen. He applied for her to get a spousal visa to come to the United States. Well, they waited and waited. In the meantime, Martin was born, who's now 20 months old, and they waited. And eventually, one of her relatives reported her to the Sudanese authorities and said that she was committing adultery because, as what he said, as a Muslim, her marriage to Daniel was not considered valid. This is a part of the war on women in Sharia, that if you are a Christian, you cannot marry a Muslim. So her marriage was considered invalid, therefore she was committing adultery. So Miriam went to the authorities and brought her marriage certificate, showed that she had been married in the church in Khartoum and that it said that she was a Christian, and thought that that would, make it okay. Instead, the government charged her with apostasy, the crime of leaving her faith and becoming an apostate, which is punishable by death. So since February of this year, she's been in prison, in Omdurman prison in Khartoum, along with Martin. His father cannot have custody of him because his father is an infidel. So this little boy has had to stay in prison with his mother, who is 9 months pregnant with the couple's second child. And so she has been sentenced to 100 lashes for adultery, and then to death for apostasy. The judge yesterday had given her 3 days to change her mind. This reminds me of in the Bible, in the Old Testament, the stories of Daniel and of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, how Daniel was told by the king that he had to stop praying to his God, the God of Israel, and had to only worship the way he was supposed to in exile there in Persia, Iran today. So things haven't changed much. But Daniel said, no, I can't do that, and so was put into the den of lions. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were kind of proteges of Daniel, had to bow down to an idol. And they said, no, we won't bow down. And so they were put into a furnace to be burned. In both cases, God sent an angel to rescue them. And that's what we're praying for Miriam. Because she told the judge, no, I can't renounce my faith. I'm a Christian. And if you have to kill me, kill me. So, but the other side of this story, other than that war on women, is why isn't the United States government helping an American citizen adult American citizen child and the wife of an American citizen and the unborn child of an American citizen. Why did it take so long and still not get a spousal visa for this woman to come to the United States with her husband? And Daniel has also said that when he called the U.S. Embassy, they said that they couldn't help him. And they can't help his son unless he has a DNA test to prove that he's the father of the child, which they have to send the test to the United States first and then bring it back. So we really need to raise an uproar about this case and help this woman who is being victimized both by the Sudanese Islamic government and by our own government. Okay, the next one. This is Deborah, who is now called Deborah Peter. Her Nigerian name is being withheld. You've all heard, I know, about Bring Back Our Girls, about the girls who were abducted by Boko Haram in Nigeria from their school. Well, Deborah was also a victim of Boko Haram. Her dad was a pastor in Chibok, the same town where the girls were taken. And first his church was burned down, and he rebuilt it, and then Boko Haram came and killed him in front of her and her brother as well. In fact, this just at the Hudson Institute the other day, Deborah spoke publicly for the first time and talked about this experience of seeing her dad and her brother killed by Boko Haram. And then at that point, the war on women under Boko Haram was a little less than it is today when they abduct the girls. They said, well, because she's a girl, we're going to not hurt her. So they just tied her up and left her between the bodies of her father and brother until the army could come and rescue her. So what's going on with Boko Haram is being acknowledged now, even by the left, as abuse of women. They're looking at it as deprivation of Western education and of sex trafficking kinds of issues, but it's a lot deeper than that. It's both the war on women, and it's also the war on the Christian faith, which you won't hear as much about. But Boko Haram, the leader, Abu Bakr Shagau, has said he would have no more compunction about killing a Christian than he would a chicken. So this is a group whose goal is to exterminate the Christians in Nigeria. Nigeria is the largest Christian country in the world, although the Assistant Secretary of State for Africa said at a hearing, Nigeria is the largest Muslim country in the world. There are a lot of Muslims in Nigeria, and there are a lot of Christians, and basically it's almost a 50-50 split, but I know for a fact that there's more Anglicans in Nigeria than there are anywhere else in the world. And I'm actually a member of the Anglican Church of Nigeria, so this is very personal to me in another way. But this is another case where the war on women is being felt. And it's great that people have caught on, and I know there's been a lot of mockery of the hashtag diplomacy, but we can't stop. Some conservatives have used this just as a way to get back at Hillary Clinton because she didn't designate Boko Haram as an FTO for so long. But that's not what our purpose is. Sure, point that out, because I'm mad that they weren't designated too. The Nigeria task force that I'm on worked for 4 years to get designation of foreign terrorist organization on Boko Haram. But it's about the people. It's about the killing of people because of their faith. Boko Haram is also killing Muslims who don't adhere to the strict kind of Islam that they say. And if they know that a Muslim is protecting a Christian or is sympathetic to what's happening, they would go after them as well. This is absolutely a terrible group, and it was told in this meeting at Hudson that they are actually second after Taliban as the most powerful terrorist group in the world right now. Okay, let's move on. Now, we're going to go back in the past because the war on women has been going on, as we said, for centuries. This isn't going back that far, but this is Irina Ratushinskaya, who was a poet in the Soviet Union and was in prison because of her poems. As a college student in Odessa, she refused to be complacent and to lie about the evils of the Soviet system. And she was a great poet and was well known, and because of that, the Soviet government thought that they needed to really crack down on her. So for her refusal to compromise her integrity, she was awarded the maximum sentence then, this is in the late 70s and early 80s. The maximum sentence was 7 years strict regime camp. So, think Solzhenitsyn and the Gulag Archipelago, and that's where Irina was. And then 5 years exile. She was blacklisted because she and her husband, Igor, who was actually from Chernobyl, were tried to emigrate. They applied to emigrate, and for that she was also blacklisted. Also for signing a letter in defense of Sakharov in 1981. So she was put into prison. Her poems began to circle in the samizdat, the underground literature, the literature of dissent, and were published abroad. She would, as others had done, scratch out poems on cakes of soap and then hand them to visitors, and they got out that way. But the Soviet government put her in prison with this harsh sentence, hoping to silence her. Well, we know about strong women. They don't get silenced when they're oppressed. They get louder. At 31, Irina was the youngest of the women prisoners in Mordovian camp, which had many other faithful women as prisoners. And in fact, those other women sent a letter to the West saying that Irina was a target of repression by the camp authorities. She was denied visits with her husband, which of course today, Miriam, Ibrahim, is also denied visits with her husband. She was also put in a punishment cell, which she spent 138 days during a 2-year period in a punishment cell, which is below freezing. The temperature would reach below freezing. The ceiling would freeze. It was also damp. And she would be on punitive rations of just bread and cold water. She suffered a lot of illness as a result, chronic fever and kidney inflammation. And her husband wrote to say that she was in danger. Her life was in danger many times. But Irina believed in the power of God. She was a Christian, and one of her poems talks about feeling the prayers of people for her, almost in a tangible way, so that when she was in this cold punishment cell, she would suddenly feel warm, and she would know that people were praying for her. As she wrote, "Believe me, it was often thus in solitary cells on winter nights, a sudden sense of joy and warmth, and a resounding note of love. And then, unsleeping, I would know, a huddle by an icy wall, someone is thinking of me now, petitioning the Lord for me." And that kept her going and allowed her to stay in that situation for a long time, over 2 years. She was released in October 1986 on the eve of the Reykjavik summit between President Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev, because of the advocacy of people around the world, and because it was made aware to President Reagan that this woman was in this situation, and he knew how to use diplomacy and how to combine human rights issues and other national security and economic issues in one, which seems to be a lost art. So she was released. She came to the United States with her husband for a while, for a few years, and in 1987, IRD, where I work, gave her our Religious Freedom Award. Well, I wasn't working at IRD yet in 1987. I started in when did I start? 93. I just had my 20-year anniversary, but I'm bad at math. But it's funny how it all circles around, for me, because she was one of the inspirations for me to get involved with the persecuted church around the world, long before I came to IRD. And yet, here she was getting an award from IRD, the award which now I'm supposed to pick a person to receive. So this is just, I really, when I titled this Women of Suffering, Women of Valor, I thought of Irina, particularly because she was the beginnings for me, and she was such a woman of valor. Okay, we'll go on to the next one. Another modern-day hero, Christy Anastas, was from Bethlehem, a Palestinian Christian from Bethlehem, who now lives in London because she couldn't live with the lies of Hamas. Her family is in a house that is the only house in Bethlehem that is surrounded on 3 sides by the security wall. And the really pro-Palestinian advocates, both in the church and in Islam, who work together on this issue, really used that to talk about, these poor people, they're suffering such oppression in this house, surrounded by 3 sides, they can't see the sky, whatever. And Christy was in actually a 60 Minutes show on that issue. But Christy became unsettled about having to always speak one way about things. And she couldn't dislike Israel as much as they wanted her to. And she started to speak the truth about what was happening, about what Hamas was doing to the Christians in Palestine, in the Palestinian areas. That it was not Israel that was responsible for the deaths of these people, but that people had to keep their mouths shut, that they were terrified to speak. And sure enough, when she started to speak that way, her uncle came to her and said, I'm telling you this for your own good, but I have this gun and I have a bullet, and if I have to, I'll put the bullet in the gun and shoot you in the head and kill you, because it's better that you should die than that our whole family be killed by Hamas. Now, he would never say that publicly, but he told her that, and she was not willing to stop speaking the truth. So she fled to London. She lives in London now. She still receives death threats, but she's speaking. In this, you can see she had a little microphone there. She was actually speaking in a panel about what was taking place. Her family, after she left, received death threats. They had to publicly denounce her and say that she was no longer their daughter in order to not be persecuted themselves. So Christy is just, I think, one of my colleagues at IRD has been writing about her and about how this confronts and counters the lies that are often told on the left, and that being as pretty as she is and as straightforward as she is and courageous as she really has a role to play in this to help open people's eyes. Okay, my final pictures that I want to show you all come from Iran. We've talked about some of these issues personally, about the women that they're involved with. Let me just say before we move on to this, that in general, this is the war on women. It's misogyny, on steroids. It's the lack of personal freedom of women, the lack of ability to own personal property. You all probably have heard, in Saudi Arabia, women can't drive cars. In the case of Miriam, who tried to prove she was a Christian, she even had folks from Western Sudan who knew her when she was growing up come and testify. But because the witness of a woman is only worth half of a man's in Sharia, they were not believed. Plus, they would probably be very vulnerable themselves. There's this vulnerability of women and girls, as we've seen with Deborah and with the girls who were abducted by Boko Haram, to be taken like that and be sold into slavery. Now, when I started working at IRD, we were working on South Sudan, on the war, and there was a lot of controversy about the whole slave issue. There were international organizations, very well-known ones that didn't want you to, they wouldn't even use the word slave. They would put it in quotation marks, and they would say this is tribal abduction. But I soon learned that tribal abduction is a very different thing than chattel slavery and jihad, in which the women and children were the booty of war. And that was what was happening in Sudan then, to tens of thousands of people, and thank God that it became known, because organizations like Christian Solidarity International were willing to go and redeem the people out of slavery. And I must say, too, that that is a very time-honored thing in the Christian church. In the Middle Ages, people were redeemed out of slavery who had been taken by the Moors and things like that. So this is not anything new. But that was happening then, and now we see it happening again with Boko Haram. There are also parallels between what Boko Haram is doing now with what I wrote about in my book, Girl Soldier, the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda under Joseph Kony. It seems to me like Kony and Abu Bakr Shigall must be comparing notes on what they're doing, because this is a horrific use of children. Deborah didn't suffer this, but another girl who actually escaped, not from this last time of the 300 girls, but this had started last year, and my friend Emmanuel found this girl who had been a child bride, and she had been trained to use weapons, to be like a pack mule and carry the things for the people, and was being groomed to be a wife of one of the soldiers. And she had 7 days to decide whether she would convert to Islam or not. And one of the Boko Haram guys actually had come from her village, and he told her, you need to do this or they're going to kill you tomorrow. At least pretend, He said, I can't get out because they've tortured me, and this is the only life I know now. But you need to just pretend that you convert. So that's what she did. And they were going to make her the bride, but because she had been an infidel, she had to go through a 90-day purification so that she'd be worthy of the Boko Haram soldier. So when the end of the 90 days came, she just took off because they trusted her at that point. They thought she was a good little Muslim and she was carrying their weapons for them, and she escaped. And she was found by a nomad. There were no soldiers in the area to help her. So that's another thing that is happening, that these women were basically having to help themselves. They're on their own. My co-author, Grace Acalo, also escaped from the LRA, and she did it by pretending to be dead after a battle. And then, luckily for her, she was found by the SPLA in South Sudan. And but this is something that shows the vulnerability of women being manipulated and abused in this war on women. So finally, we'll get to Iran. This story is another one that seems to me almost biblical, because Fereshte Debaj, this woman on the right, is the daughter of the man on the left, Mehdi Debaj. When I first came to work at IRD, Mehdi Debaj was a very influential pastor in Iran. He was a convert from Islam himself at the age of about 20, and since that time had been an evangelist, had been a house church pastor in the underground churches, was reaching many people. In Iran at that point, it was okay if you were like an Armenian, you could talk to the Armenians, but you could not speak Farsi and speak to the Iranian people. But that's what he did. So he was arrested for apostasy, like Miriam, who we talked about, and was sentenced to death. And a huge outcry went out in the West and around the world, and he was released. But 6 months later, he was abducted and murdered by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. So it was a martyr for his faith. Now, if I were Fereshte Debaj and I had lost my father like that, I think I would keep my mouth shut. I wouldn't talk about Christianity at all. I mean, I hope I wouldn't be like that. But I think that I would be very circumspect about my faith if I even had it at all, if I weren't really just so angry at God for allowing my father to die that I wouldn't even speak that way. But Fereshte and her husband are leaders of the underground church in Iran, of house churches, and have planted dozens and dozens of house churches. So they were arrested, and they were in prison. That's their little girl who, kindly enough, the authorities found his parents and gave the little girl to them. But things were different because this time the outcry worked, and so far successfully they were released from prison and haven't been put in prison again since, to my knowledge. So, and are still continuing to do what they do. But it reminded me of, in the book of Acts, the apostles, after Stephen was martyred by Paul, Saul of Tarsus then, and it said that that the apostles gathered together to pray. Well, if I were them, I'd be praying, oh God, please protect me, don't let them get me. But what they prayed was that God would allow them to speak with boldness. And I think that Fereshte is like that. I just love that she has those same beautiful eyes that her dad does, doesn't she? But she is definitely a woman of valor. Okay. And you may have heard of Miriam Rastampour and Marzia Amirzada, who are also Iranian Christians, who were put in that prison, Evin prison in Tehran, which is like really not a nice place to be at all. And they wrote a book about their experience. So I just want to give you a few little, just to tell you, it's called Captive in Iran. They were arrested in 2009 on charges of apostasy. Here we go again, so, you know, that could be a death sentence. Anti-government activity, that means telling people about their faith, and blasphemy, for which they were sentenced to execution by hanging. They were threatened with death and torture when they were imprisoned in Evin prison. And they were actually released and cleared of all charges 9 months later and immigrated to the United States, where they now live in Georgia. But this is what they did when they were putting their lives on the line. They were born into Muslim families and converted to Christianity. They joined forces and began covertly handing out Farsi copies of the New Testament to 20,000 people in Iran. They led 2 secret house churches, one for young people and one for prostitutes to worship. And then they continued evangelizing when they were in prison. So they are really some tough women. They're really awesome women. I was privileged to meet them at Hudson Institute when they came. But they continue to speak now about what happened to them, and to also to be advocates for others in Iran who are in similar situations. So one of the things that I see about these women is they don't just think about themselves, they think about all those around them. Okay, and the final slide. This is Najma Abedini, the wife of Pastor Saeed Abedini, who you've probably heard about, an American citizen who's in prison in Iran. She's a faithful wife, and I think, that persecution and suffering and this war on women doesn't just affect the ones who are prisoners, but their families. And Najma is one of these, and she continues to speak out about what has happened to her husband and to ask the U.S. government and the world to intervene on his behalf. In fact, that was taken at the House of Representatives when she came to speak. So she is really doing that. But she is like many women around the world who are in this situation, the widows of Christians, for instance, in Pakistan, where Christians are considered second-class citizens, and the only jobs that the Christian men can get are to work in the sewers. And because the people in charge don't consider them of any worth, they send them into these sewers when there are problems with no protection. And many men have died in these sewers, and then their wives are left, their property is taken from them by, the landlords or by people who live next door who just say, oh, there's no man to protect her now, so I think I'll just take her house. And there's also intimidation and harassment. There's conversion by rape taking place in many countries around the world. This is the real war on women. I think every time we hear the lies, we need to counter them with this. So that's really what you can do. As conservatives, you know the truth, and you're not afraid of speaking the truth. So stand for these sisters, please, and find a story that really inspires you among these or among the thousands of others, and be an advocate even for that one person. We're going to start a campaign for Miriam, Ibrahim, at IRD. I've had some of my Sudanese women friends, both Christian and Muslim, say, we have to do something for this lady. So we're going to start that. And, check out IRD, Juicy Ecumenism, our blog site, and we'll be talking about that soon. So thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you. What a great talk. I think Nancy Pelosi and Hillary Clinton need to hear a little about the real war on women, and so they could talk about what the real problem is. Yes, it's excellent. We have a little bit of time for questions, and we have
I have a question, actually.
Catherine
Sure.
with the microphone. Yes, okay.
I guess I'll just
Give your name and affiliation, just for the
Catherine
tape.
Rodriguez with the Clare Luce Institute. I just wanted to ask you what your opinion was on why Secretary of State Clinton didn't want to classify Boko Haram as a terrorist organization.
Oh boy, we could spend I could do a whole lecture on that, but I won't. There are several reasons. I think what we found as we did advocacy for 4 years to try to get it to happen was that the main reason is that the narrative of the State Department is so unreal on Nigeria in general, and especially on this issue of northern Nigeria and Boko Haram. They consider the reason why these guys do what they do as an economic issue, that they're impoverished and marginalized, and they don't say it. Well, sometimes they even say it, but because there's a Christian president of Nigeria right now, they think that that it obviously can't be fair to the Muslims. So Assistant Secretary of State Johnny Carson did say things like that in his testimony, and Congressman Chris Smith called him on it and said, I don't think you're being very complimentary to poor people, because I know plenty of poor people around the world and they don't act like that. And the other thing is, they're not poor. They're getting money from the Gulf countries, from Saudi Arabia. They were trained in Mali. This was what happened. They had big SUVs, fully equipped, like you would see with the most wealthy of people, driving back and forth to Mali. They had their own chef with them when the French troops came to kick the Malian Islamist jihadists out, and they found Boko Haram there too. They also found the guy's chef, who was the one who told them I was here with Boko Haram. They paid me to cook for them. So it doesn't sound to me like they're too impoverished. So that, and even now that they've designated them, it's still the narrative. They don't want the Nigerian government to, be too hard on them. So, we need to change the whole narrative of the State Department, but good luck with that. So,
Other questions?
I have one. Okay, thank you for coming today. In terms of, I think, going back to Nigeria and I think there are serious corruption issues with that, with the government and with particularly the heavy hand of the military forces. Do you think that this kidnapping has really awakened the administration, Jonathan's administration, to kind of reevaluate, okay, what we've been doing to combat Boko Haram has not been working. So do we need to kind of go back to the drawing board and accept that we haven't been able to get a handle on this the way that we should have as a sovereign state and largest military force in Africa? I think, do you think that there is some sort of kind of recalculation, or is it?
I hope there is.
Business as usual.
No, I hope there is. I think too, though, for one thing, we know that Boko Haram has more sophisticated weaponry than the Nigerian military does right now, and the military has been pretty afraid of Boko Haram at this point. I know they have dealt with them in heavy-handed ways in the past, but I do think that they need to regroup and see how to combat this. It's hard because Boko Haram is now expanding almost into Cameroon, where the Christian refugees are now, and of course south to Abuja. So it's becoming more and more of a problem. But I will say too, here's another State Department thing, that the State Department did tell Jonathan not to be as hard on Boko Haram in the early days when it might have been easier to stop them. So, I'd love to have, he's not a woman, but Emmanuel Ogebe, who I work with on this issue, is a great one to listen to on this because he is a Northern Nigerian who's an attorney here in the United States. And next week, there's a full House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing on Nigeria, on Boko Haram. So if anybody's interested in hearing that.
Other than working to get some new national leadership, what can people do to make a difference? I mean, these are horrible stories.
It is. And
God bless these women.
Yes. Well, start there. Pray.
Yeah.
Prayer is always necessary and needed. And I always say you should pray first, and then whatever you do it with prayer, and then pray afterwards too. But, when I started working on this, we were sending faxes. We didn't have social media. We didn't have the International Religious Freedom Act, which was passed in 1998. So therefore, we didn't have the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. They didn't even have a religious freedom office at State Department. So there are many more tools now to use, especially social media, to get out the word. And I'd say, especially on this critical case with Miriam, I forgot to tell you, the judge did say, well, we're going to postpone her execution until 2 years after her child is born. So, she'll have her child, she'll have a chance to wean the child, and then she'll be hanged. But they're not postponing the flogging. That's supposed to happen soon after she has her baby. Her lawyers have appealed, so right now is the time to pressure your member of Congress, every member of Congress, to pressure the administration on this. There must be some kind of precedent that this is a U.S. citizen that we're talking about's wife, and the child is a U.S. citizen.
Well, we are so grateful to you
Thank
and your
you.
colleagues for the work you do and for coming and telling us about it today. We have a couple little gifts for you before we eat. We have our limited edition Clare Boothe Luce policy.
Yeah, I'm a coffee
mug
drinker too.
With her famous saying, what is it?
No good deed goes unpunished.
Yeah, that was hers.
Thank you.
And every woman needs a Clare Boothe Luce tote bag.
All right. I love
And
it.
I think Charlotte has some for you too.
Goodies.
I have a book for you from the Heritage Foundation in
thank
Defense
you.
of Freedom. So thank you for
very
joining us
much. I
today.
appreciate it. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. We have a lunch.
Speak out for these ladies.
Terrific. There you go. You put it all
Thank
right
you.
in.
I can.
I actually use this when I fly. This is because I can put my purse in it.
Oh, yeah.
And then you have two bags. Or
That's
you
right.
have to.
Yeah.
Yep.
That was excellent.
Oh,
Really
thank
good.
you.
And a lot more people will be watching it online.
Okay.
I wanted to give you my card.
Yes.
Since we're fellow Anglers, where do you meet? Where's Church of the Apostle meet?
We're meeting in Oakton, Virginia at the Whole Word Fellowship.